My name is Nora Planbeck. I'm an ADHDer. I'm a mom of two ADHD boys, and I come from a whole family of ADHDers. And I'm also a certified coach that is specialized in ADHD coaching. And my goal with starting this channel is to use it as a platform to share all of my ADHD knowledge and the strategies and tips that have been helping me and a lot of others around me, in hopes that other ADHDers can also find value in them and it would help them. Now, I need to note that I am not a licensed therapist or a licensed doctor. I'm a certified coach that specializes in interventions and strategies for individuals with ADHD. There are so many different opinions and ideas and perceptions on what ADHD means. So before we start, I want to make sure that I clarify what my definition of ADHD is, what my perception of it is, so we're on the same page that you can leverage those strategies and tips and they can be helpful. And my definition of ADHD in very simple terms, it is a brain that works differently than the typical societal expectations of how a brain should work. Wait, what? What does it mean that it works differently? So if we use an example of our electric wiring at home, each wire is responsible for transferring electricity to one of the rooms or the areas in our house so we can use that electricity. Our brains function very similar. We have different areas in our brains or different regions. Each one has its own function and responsibility. And for us to perform a whole action, they need to talk to each other to be able to coordinate the action. And our brain has those wires that transfer that information between them back and forth. So in our electric wiring at home, if one of the wires is weak and it's not consistently transferring that electric energy to the room, sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. So sometimes when you go turn on the light in that room, it will turn on, sometimes it won't. The ADHD brain is very similar. There are 5 main areas in our brain that are impacted by the ADHD. Each one of those areas has its own functions, and the wiring between those areas, some of those wires might have a deficiency that it might not always transfer the information back and forth between those areas. Okay, what? Like, that's too much. Too much information overload. Okay, so let's translate how this might show up in a person, and we'll use the famous ADHD paralysis as the example of what happens inside. So ADHD paralysis is truly the individual is frozen and paralyzed from being able to will themselves to take any action. Their brain is overwhelmed and it feels that any action right now is so exhausting and tiring that it went into freeze mode. Now imagine a very busy main street with a lot of different intersections, and the traffic coming through those intersections is not really that self-disciplined. So we put a police officer in the middle of those intersections to make sure everyone is following order, and then we have a more organized flow. But what happens if the police officer gets overwhelmed and freezes and doesn't know what to do with the traffic anymore? Catastrophe. And slower, you're going to find that lesser cars are able to make it out of the intersection. So in the ADHD brain, those 5 areas that are mainly impacted by ADHD, those are our intersections, or 4 of them are our intersections, and the traffic is the information between them that they're trying to communicate with each other. And then you have your police officer, which is the area that's called the prefrontal cortex. And again, we'll get more into details of that area in future videos, but for now, this is your area that's responsible for coordinating your executive function and skills. So your attention, your focus, your working memory, your emotions, that's your police officer. Imagine prefrontal cortex police officer gets overwhelmed from all of the other areas sending information and freezes. Going back to our electric wiring, short circuit everything down. Impacts any action that we're trying to do. It's frozen. And in order to get the brain unstuck out of paralysis mode back to functioning, you need to work with that police officer to help it not be as overwhelmed and even motivated a little bit. This is an example of how the different wiring might show up. Know that not every ADHD brain experiences the malfunction in the same areas of wiring. It varies between different areas and impacts different communications, which means it will show up differently from one person to the other. Oh my God, information overload again, too much. I know. When we understand how our flavor of ADHD looks like and how our wiring works, we have a map to ourselves. Then we are in charge and in control of knowing the directions of where we want to go. We partner with our ADHD and possibly leverage it as a strength instead of just blindly going against it without knowing the way. We have this tendency to quickly try to look for what are the shortcomings in anything that we don't understand and it doesn't look like how it should be typically functioning, and try to band-aid it to make it work the way we know how it should be working. Guess what? With ADHD, it's not going away, it's not getting grown out of, and definitely does not need correction. What if we shift our way of thinking to, instead of trying to fix it, we try to understand it and understand how the conditions in the environment around it shapes it. What conditions help promote the brain and make it function at its highest level, and what conditions hinder it and block it and get the policeman overwhelmed and not able to function and freeze. If we learn this, we have powerful knowledge to create the right conditions around us to be able to reach our potential, and also we would know how to react in the conditions that do hinder us. Okay, so if you're still hanging in there with me and still watching, I really hope this was helpful for you. I talked a lot, I threw a lot of different jargons out there. I hope there is some value to it, and I will continue to share every week more information about what ADHD means and some helpful tips and strategies to help you acclimate your conditions, to partner with it, and even make it your superpower.